Well, I am Sarah Lambert. I am the Vice President of Programs and Community Investment at the Foundation. So I oversee kind of community partnerships, strategic initiatives, things like that. I've been with the Foundation for about 7.5 years, and which now makes me the second longest tenured employee here, which feels insane. So I'm just here to welcome everybody and go through some of the basics. So first I'm going to have the rest of the staff introduce themselves. So Jen, you want to kick us off?
Sure. Hi, I am Jennifer Smith. I'm the engagement director here at the Foundation, and I've been with CFNIL since June of 2018, so going on 5 years. And you'll hear a lot more from me later in the presentation.
All right, James.
Yes, James Patterson, Senior Program Director at the Community Foundation. I've been here for a mere 22 years.
And Lisa.
I am Lisa DeLang. I'm the Program and Administrative Associate here, and I've been here about 1.5 years.
And Lisa is the person who you email always. So I think most of our instructions now are just call Lisa. So so that holds. Still just call Lisa. So, all right, Jen, you want to go to the next slide, please? All right, so our agenda for today, I'm going to talk a little bit about our scholarship programs and NDP trusts, which are not related to community grants, but good information to have anyway. Then James is going to go into reporting and communication. Jen will talk about publicity and talking about how to talk about your grant. And then we'll have time for questions and answers at the end. We want to keep this very casual, so feel free to raise your hands or drop a question in the chat or just come off mute and ask the question outright. We are happy to stop, and the more interactive these sessions are, we find the more pleasant they are for everyone involved. So don't hesitate. I believe we can just jump into the next one. Yep. So in Youth We Trust, that is our youth philanthropy program. We have about 25 high school students from all over the 4-county area who get together once a month and do philanthropy. So they write grants, they read grants, they create grant applications, they learn about the community. They're a very cool bunch of kids, and they actually run 2 grant cycles every year that mirror our community grants process. A little bit less money, but still a great opportunity for your organizations. We just finished our first cycle, which was specifically for youth. So youth run and youth serving organizations. So that's like lots of key clubs, robotics, things like that. Those announcements will actually be going out momentarily. But we have another application cycle coming up for our adult cycle. So that's where we have actual nonprofits, so professionally run nonprofits who are applying. The primary requirement is that you are serving youth. But other than that, it can be all sorts of projects. We are prioritizing projects that are working in the field of mental health, but that's a very wide field. So don't let that stop you from applying if you think you've got a good project that that our students would appreciate. The application will open on March 2nd. It'll be open for about a month, and the funds will be available in April, May time period. And you can find more information on the website link at the bottom of the page. All right, and scholarships. It is scholarship season right now. The application closes next week on February 1st at 5 p.m. We are anticipating being able to award probably more than $400,000 this year in over 100 different funds with lots of different criteria. Our scholarships are for students who or for all kinds of students. They're not just for graduating high school seniors. They're for students going into a vocational career, for certifications, things like that. Adult learners, people returning to school, current college students. Virtually anyone can apply if they're looking to further their post-secondary education. If you have any questions about that, you can contact Heather Rapp. She's our new scholarship associate. She's currently giving a presentation at Christian Life, so that's why she's not on this call. She has been out and about. So we really want to encourage you all to, for any of those students in your lives or in your organization, to check it out. It's a great opportunity to get some funding for school. So, and then speaking of scholarships and getting involved, we are looking for volunteer reviewers. Our program typically receives somewhere north of 1,000 applications. I think we're probably going to break a record this year. And we are only able to run the program the way that we do because we have an absolute army of volunteers who help us review the applications. It's a pretty short time period. It's about 2 weeks where you are reading and reviewing applications on your own time, whenever you'd like. Everything happens online. And it typically takes somewhere between 15 and 20 hours over a 2-week period, but that changes drastically depending on experience, volume, things like that. But that's where we that's a sweet spot we try and hit. And you'd be working in a team who all come together for one in-person meeting to make the final selections. So it's nobody's responsibility to make all these final decisions. You're making recommendations to a board of trustees as a group. I feel like it's a really hopeful process. You get to see all the awesome stuff that our students are doing and all the things that they're going to do. It's really hopeful. We have one volunteer who every year leads the meeting and says, my faith in humanity has been restored because you get to see just how awesome Rockford is and the Northern Illinois is. So if that's something that might appeal to you, it's one very short, intense time period, and then you're done for the year. Definitely let Lisa know and she can get you set up. Or we're going to start orientation in the next month. So we're getting close to that time period. So anybody have any questions about those? All right, then I'm going to hand it off to James Patterson to talk about community grants.
All right. Well, we get to talk about your and my favorite subject, which is reporting. So we'll go to the next slide. See, look how excited this young man is about it. So why is it important? Why is it important that we report on our grant activity? We'll go to the next slide and find out why. First of all, results are the most important thing, right? That's why we do what we do. That's the whole point. It's the end that we seek. And so the focus really should be on that. And in many ways, we should think about reporting as being even more important than the application itself. There's also this little pesky IRS compliance piece too. We are a 501c3, much like you are. And in order to maintain that status, we have to prove that the dollars that we grant are being used charitably. So the IRS frowns on it if that doesn't occur. There's also a stewardship piece, and it's sort of a due diligence piece, but looking at it from the donor perspective. So our donors give us funds, many of them, since 1953, have given us funds just to do good work with, just charitable work. So we have to make sure that it's been being done charitably. But then there are other donors that we have that have zeroed in on, say, arts and humanities, or maybe helping folks with developmental disabilities, that kind of thing. So we have to be sure that those dollars are being used for those particular purposes to uphold donor intent, which is very important to the Community Foundation. Program development is another area, and this is more for you as an organization, but to be able to look at the results that you're attempting to get and how close you're getting to those can help you refine and develop your program. It's a way for you to see what should stay and what should go in terms of what your activity is and the way that you perform it. And I like to think of your reporting is a good way to have hard evidence as to what you are doing actually makes a difference. And that's good for your supporters, good for your donors. It's good for potential funders. People do like to see concrete evidence that something is effective. And so this can be a good way for you to do that. It's also a legacy for your charitable activity. From the standpoint of you being able to look back over time and see what has worked and what has not worked as well, and just the development of the program. And you could probably see different trends and things based on what's going on in the community as things evolve over time. There's also the opportunity for us to see things where we might want to help promote the good work that you're doing in the reporting, different things like photos and things like that, different stories that you have. There are opportunities potentially to do that. So another good reason. Last but not least is that we actually do use this data that you put into these reports. We summarize these, each one of them. We kind of check to see how they've done in terms of meeting the results they're looking for. And then we rate them between green for really good, yellow for in between, and then red for not as good. Most of them are either green or yellow, but occasionally there's a red. But what we do is we compile this into a post-grant report. This post-grant report is shared with our board of directors and our committee members who help make those decisions, but it's absolutely confidential to them. Strict confidentiality on that. And so it's not outside of there. But one of the things about it is that what we found, if an organization is applying for a previous program that they've been funded for, a lot of times the information in the reporting is more important to them than even the application information, because it shows what actually you are capable of. So a good reason to take it seriously. We'll go to the next slide. So let's look at the different elements of the report. And we'll go to the next slide and look at our demographic data slide here. So this probably looks very familiar to you from the application. You've got different demographics that we track: the county, we look at the age, the gender, the race and ethnicity, are the 4 categories that we really look at. The big difference between this and the application is that here we're asking for actual numbers because you've done the program. You're in many cases, you can give us actual numbers. When we do the application, it's a projection. So actual numbers don't always make sense. So this is easier in certain circumstances than others, right? So if you have a program where you're registering or enrolling participants, you may have more exact information, and you'll get closer to an exact count in these various areas. However, if you're doing something that has an audience, it's a lot harder to do that, you know, unless you try to do some kind of survey or something like that. Many times it's just not practical. What you can do in those situations, though, to get at some numbers, is to take a look at the audience and kind of look at some of the categories and just sort of, in your mind, guess what you think you see out there. So there's 10% from this particular race or ethnicity, and so on. So, and once you have those percentages in your mind, then you would need to have a head count, of course, of all the folks that came, and then you can come up with numbers that will go in there. Now, it won't be precise. We understand that, but it gives us a general idea. And the important thing for us, the important thing is that we need to know that we're serving our entire community. And so we poll these statistics from time to time just to see who we are serving. So it's important from that perspective. We don't look at it as something that's absolutely accurate. So, and we realize that there's some variation in it. But so from that perspective, it's something that we really need for you to do. We'll go to the next slide. Of course, it's very important if you're going to be collecting this information is that you plan ahead. So if you're doing your registration forms or enrollment forms or things like that, you would want to be able to ask them these questions. Of course, always giving them the opportunity to opt out, right? So, but that's what you want to be able to do. And if you're going to be able to, if you're going to do like a visual survey, like I was talking about it before with an audience or something like that, you're going to want to have someone designated to do that. Because if you don't do it, trying to look back and think, oh, how many people were here, you know, in this way or the other, or you know, getting that head count, you have to have a plan for that. Are you, you know, using a clicker as people come in the door? Are you know, how is it being done? But so thinking ahead to make sure you get that information. We'll go to the next slide.
Hey,
James.
Yes, hello.
Pam
has a
raised her
question.
hand. Yeah.
You did. Hello, Pam. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing good.
So good. Just a question for you. Should the numbers be unduplicated numbers? So in our case, we can serve people more than one time for different programs. Right. So do we count them as one or count them for each time that they participate?
That's a great question. And it probably depends. So if we're funding a specific aspect of your programming, I mean, we're not always funding all of your programming. It might be a particular series that you're doing or something along those lines. Probably, we're really looking for unduplicated numbers from that standpoint. But if it's not possible to sort that out, then duplicated is fine too. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
Sure. Okay, so the next section that you will see is where you get to describe your activity that you've done. And the first part of it is describing it very briefly, very quickly, in 2 sentences or less, really just a very brief explanation. And this is the kind of thing that we use for publications and for reporting. That's why it needs to be concise. We actually use it for that post-grant report that I told you about. That's one of the pieces that goes into it. But we want to hear about everything that you're doing as well. We don't want you to be restricted to those 2 sentences. Surely that does no justice to your programming. So we do give you the second field here that right now it says 5,000 characters. We got rid of that. It's 10,000 characters. You can really knock yourself out and tell us everything about it. And we do want you to tell us about everything in the program. I know that it says here that if there's anything that's changed, provide an explanation. So we don't just want to hear about what changed. We want to hear about it all. And this is your opportunity to really tell your story and what you were able to accomplish. So we'll go to the next slide and make sure that I said everything I was supposed to. And I didn't mention the fact that your little 2-sentence short, brief description could be like an elevator speech. So not like an elevator speech for a 10-story building, but more like a 3-story building, right? Pretty short. Next slide, please. Gets awkward saying next slide, please, but there's no other way for us to do this. So you have to bear with us. All right, this is my favorite part. This is my favorite part of the entire report. It's the evaluating of the results, because again, that's why we do what we do, right? We're trying to make change. We're trying to help people. We're trying to improve people's quality of life. And this is where we get to show that we're doing that. So there are 2 different methods for this, depending on the type of support that you requested in your application. And you've already selected this, so that's set up for you. And the appropriate section will appear in your report on its own. So there's this one, and we'll pop forward to the next slide. And this one. So this is for capital commodity requests. Can we go backwards again? And this is for the program, project, and events section. It's different for the 2 because many cases it's really difficult for, like, if you're buying a piece of equipment or if you're buying 100 backpacks that you're going to hand out, to be able to do a more structured approach like we have here with the program, project, and event. So we give you the opportunity to do it as a little bit more of a narrative. Now, one of the important things, and we'll go ahead and skip forward 2 slides, I believe it is. Maybe back 1 slide. There we go. So it's a moving target, right? So when you're getting this section in the application, the results and the indicators and the targets and everything that you entered into your application will automatically be populated into the report for your reference. That's one of the reasons why it's really, really important to start with a very solid evaluation plan. That way, whatever you have there will make a lot of sense when you go to do your reporting. It's also really important to have a very solid evaluation plan because you need to be able to plan to collect this information, as we talked about a little bit before. And so to that end, I will sometimes, and in many cases, I've already reached out to several of you and collaborate with you to create these really strong plans. And there might be different things that I could suggest that might be helpful to you to be able to demonstrate the success that you're having and finding a way to do it in a measurable way. And so I will do that, and I have been doing that. So it's really important to start collecting this data from the very beginning. To try to go back and pull it together can be very difficult. And again, that goes back to that planning aspect. So how are you going to track the numbers that you're bringing into whatever this program is? How are you going to track any of the data that you're looking at? Maybe it's, maybe you're using pre and post tests. Well, you need to think about what those things look like and what are you collecting and how are you measuring that information. So starting from the start is very important. But doing this will help you demonstrate the impact that you have and will help you, as I mentioned before, you can share that with funders and other supporters so they can see the good that you're doing. But if you get into it, and despite your best efforts to create the most fabulous evaluation plan in the world, and you start collecting this data and it turns out that, it just doesn't make any sense, either you can't find the data that you wanted to find, right, and to use, or it's the metrics are, as you look at it, it's like, you know what, this isn't really proving what I thought it was going to prove. And there's a better way to do it, then give me a call and we will adjust it so that you have something that actually makes sense. We want you to be successful. We want to set it up to where you can be successful, where you're actually tracking things that make sense. So, and when possible, we really would like for you to be tracking things that you're already tracking. Many of you track multiple facets of your programs. So when possible, that's the best choice. We'll go to the next slide. So the next section that you'll see is what I call anecdotal evidence and program development. This is some of the perhaps qualitative kinds of things that you can bring to the reporting. And the first part is the personal story. Sometimes a story can really resonate with an audience, and certainly does with me. I oftentimes will put these stories actually in that post-grant report when it's particularly compelling. And there are many types of programs that numbers don't really seem to do it justice. You know, some charitable activities lend themselves more to the statistical approach, some more to the qualitative approach, right? And really the best situation is if you can find a way to blend both in, right? So take advantage of these fields here. So there's the personal story, really good one. And then the next field, we all know that sometimes some of the greatest results that you come up with are not anticipated. You didn't expect it to happen, but look, this is what happened as a side benefit in some fashion. Sometimes that happens, it actually happens fairly often. So here's your opportunity to talk about those. We wouldn't want you to not include those because those are just as important. And then the third field there for the anything learned, this is where you're looking at your program and helps you reflect and look at program development, right? You know, how can we improve this? What's working well? What's not working well? That kind of thing. Now, these second two fields that I have, the unanticipated results and the anything learned, both of those are also really good ways to mitigate the situation whenever maybe your statistical results in the result, evaluation plan, when those maybe didn't go as well as you had hoped. If you can explain why in the anything learned, you can oftentimes the unanticipated results are just as good as what you were actually driving toward. So when you include information there, and we look at having learned something very important, having gotten some unanticipated results, that's success too, right? So we talked about that rating system for the post-grant reporting. You could still get a green if you're able to explain that you've learned something through this process, and maybe there were some other results that occurred. So take advantage of those fields. We'll go to the next slide. So more checking me to see if I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing here. And I think I did. So we'll go to the next slide. So additional context that you provide for us in the reporting, there's the itemized list of expenses. And this is primarily for the whole due diligence piece, right? The making sure the dollar is being used for charitable things and being used for the program that was originally applied for. And essentially what we're really doing is making sure that it's consistent with the proposed budget that you sent in and that you spent all the dollars, or if you didn't spend all the dollars, that you issued a refund, right? So, but there are, hello. Jen, did you say something? No. All right, I thought maybe somebody had their hand up. So with the list of expenses, when we're looking to see if it's consistent with the budget, we're not so much concerned if there are small variations, right? The budget is a projection. So let's say that you had a certain amount of dollars allocated for supplies, but you needed way more supplies than what you thought you did. So that line item went over. But as it turned out, you didn't need near as many of these other types of materials, that are included, that you included in your budget. Well, if there's little variations like that, we're not going to be concerned about that. We're going to want to see it, obviously, in the itemized expenses, not too concerned about it otherwise. However, if there is something that is more major, like say, for an example, you thought you would need a staff person allocated, so you had some salary in there, But as you started to get into it, you realized, you know what, our current staff can do this if they just had a tool, like say some software. So we're going to get the software because that's going to be a capacity building thing for us. We'll be able to use it for other things, whatever. So whatever the situation is, that's a bigger change. So we're going from paying salary to paying for software. So that's something that you would want to actually reach out to us ahead of time when you're getting ready to do that. And we would have to do what we call a grant amendment. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But so that's a little bit about the expenses. Publicity is a really important piece of any charitable activity you're doing for a lot of reasons. You want people to see the good work that you're doing out there. That helps you raise additional supporters and potential donors, right? We also want people to see the good work you're doing and to see the good work that we're funding, right? So we actively, we actively seek out endowments, additional endowments, so that we can raise more money, so that we can give you all more money. So donors need to see the kinds of things that we're funding so that they can appreciate what we do. And when that time comes, that maybe will be an option for them. We'll go to the next slide. Yep, and we'll go to the next slide. So more context. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words a lot of times, right? So, and it's true in many cases. And there are some things that just really lend themselves to photos. For an example, if you have a capital improvement of some sort, having a before and after picture can be really helpful. You can absolutely see the impact in a situation like that. So some of these capital programs, it's hard to show the impact in other ways, but a photo will do that. So photos are really great. And they're especially great if you're, working with, kids always show up great in photos, right? So being able to use them for those kinds of things, but any way to connect what you're doing and the impact of what you're doing to us. So those are good. We're going to go to the next slide, and we're going to skip this slide because you'll have it. And are we going to drop the PowerPoint thing into the chat? The slides?
Probably
Yeah,
not that way, but we
Lisa-
can share them. We can
Yeah, we'll
upload them
share
to the website too. Yeah.
So anyway, we're going to do that. It's got the formula there for how you name your photos, your photo files before you upload them. So a few things to keep in mind. The report is due March 1st, 2024. You can turn it in earlier if you've completed your program. You can turn it in later if you need a little more time, but we'll talk about that in a second. We really encourage you to preview your report. And if you could go to the next slide, I'll show you what that looks like. It is available as soon as your grant is approved, which means it's available right now for you to go take a look at in your portal account. And this is how you would get to it. You can see you have the active requests down there, and you can see it says final report in the final row there, and the little blue edit link is where you access it. So you can go in there and take a look at what it looks like so you know exactly what's expected as you complete your program. So we'll go to the next slide. We ask that you be as specific as you can, not really talk in vaguely, be specific of what you're doing. And try to avoid industry jargon. I mean, we all do this, right? So we like to use terms like distributable income and expenditure responsibility. And I go home and I'm talking to my wife about work, and she's like, "What are you talking about?" So it's the same thing. You guys are experts in your fields, right? And we all have our own lingo. And when we're with our colleagues, it makes sense to use that because we know exactly what we're talking about. You should never assume that we know anything about what you're doing. We know you do good work, but you're experts in your fields and we're not experts in your fields. So, sort of dumbing it down for us is not such a bad idea. And probably one of the most important things to consider when you're completing a final report for the Community Foundation is that failure truly is an option. It is an option. We know we make grants sometimes with the idea that there's risk in mind, right? We know that it may not be successful, but we want to try new things. We want you to be able to try new things. We want you to be able to stretch out and develop new approaches to community issues and problems. So this is also where those two fields I talked about before, the unanticipated results and the anything learned questions, come into play, because this is where you can sort of flesh that out. So it is absolutely possible that you could fail, and sometimes a failure can be a success because it shows you how to go in the future, what way to go in the future, and what new things to try. So we'll go to the next slide and talk a little bit about the grantee funder relationship. Really important to keep any funder in the loop, honestly. We certainly appreciate being kept in the loop for a lot of different reasons. For one thing, we hope that we can be a resource to you. I really am quite nerdy with this reporting and evaluation and metrics and all that stuff. So if you want some help with that, I'm happy to help with that. So that's fun. But Jen, she's an amazing person when it comes to promoting things and getting the word out. She's super creative, and she would love to help you as well. And she'll tell you how much she'd love to help you in the next section of this presentation. I don't want to steal all her thunder, but an important thing also to keep in mind is not to submit your report until it's complete, your project is complete, right? We have had that where we'll get a report in and it says, we are going to. No, it shouldn't be future tense. It should be past tense. And that's why if you are not done with your charitable activity by March 1st of 2024, then you just need to call us and talk with us, and you can get an extension. We'd rather have the full impact of what you're doing. Sometimes things cause you not to be able to implement as quickly as you intended, or maybe you have to delay it for various reasons. We all remember COVID, right? So that caused an awful lot of extensions, but these things happen. There are smaller things that make these things happen too. So you can absolutely get a report extension. We mentioned the grant amendments earlier. Anytime you have a significant change to your program, the way you're going to implement it, or perhaps the budget, like we mentioned earlier, you'll want to get in touch with me. I usually say, when in doubt, give me a call. And that's the best way to start, is have that phone call. If it looks like it needs to be a grant amendment, in certain cases, I might just say, you know what, that's not really that significant of a change. You're fine, go forward. But in some cases, I would say, yeah, we probably better do a grant amendment on that. And when that's the case, I usually ask you to send me an email. Nothing more formal than that, basically just explaining what you explained to me verbally. And that's so that I can share that with folks here, and we can determine whether that particular change is appropriate. And the main criteria for us is the original intent of the program, the purpose of the program. Is it still being met? That's our main criteria. So the last thing on the list in terms of keeping us in the loop is to let us know when you're doing some of these programmings, and if you have events that are going on, or when, if you get a news story, for an example, on the TV, send us a link to it. We want to see this too. We want to celebrate with you. We want to be part of that. So definitely do that. And it's a good segue to Jennifer Smith, who's going to talk more about promotional stuff.
Awesome. Thank you, James. It is a good segue. And I put in this first picture as much a reminder to myself as to all of you. Don't panic when you're thinking about publicizing your grant. It should not be something that adds a ton of extra stress to your life. Just like we have only so many hours in the day and only so many days in the year. And I was just thinking about, I came to last year's orientation, I was like, so gung-ho that we were going to make it to every single grant program that we'd funded, and oops, there's 70 of you. And so that's not possible for us to do every year, but we try our hardest. So the whole goal of publicity is to tell the good work that you are doing in the community. That is our goal. And we hope it's yours too. In addition to that, we have a few other reasons why we ask you to publicize your grant. We really do believe that it builds credibility and can inspire continuing support for your programs. Success breeds success. And if you are talking about not just a great program that's happening, but that you received a grant, you were awarded a grant in a competitive process for that program, that's an indication that the program has, one of many indications that the program has merit, and that can speak pretty loudly to other funders as well. So we hope that you will talk about it for those reasons. We also, it's important to us, as with every nonprofit, to recognize the donor that helped make these grants possible. And collectively, when we received unrestricted gifts, those get granted out through the Community Grants program. But there's also specific people, couples, families who have given money through our whole 70-year history, which are now awarded via named funds through community grants. And we'll talk a little more about your grant award letter and the fund that was listed on there, but it's really important for us to make sure that those donors are recognized for their generosity. And James mentioned this, but I will just reiterate that people remember stories. So we love it if you share statistics. We would love it if you said the amount of the grant that you received. Cool, great, but also the stories of the people who are being impacted by your work are the things that are going to stick with people, and maybe more compelling, may get some more traction for your press release or with the media or whatever. But I really encourage you to find the story that you can share that is compelling about the work that you're doing. As far as the timing of publicity, we really leave it up to you. It's no longer sort of expectation that you receive the grant check and the next day you send out the press release. And honestly, for the media's sake, we don't want that to happen anymore, because there's only two reporters at the Register Star right now, and they don't need 80 press releases in one day saying that people got grants from the Community Foundation. Let's spread it out through the year. Makes it good sense for us in terms of getting news throughout the year, but also for you. If we've funded a program that doesn't happen until October, it doesn't make a ton of sense to send a press release out now talking about that program, or particularly if it's an event for which you would like people to attend and sell tickets and things like that. Send it closer to the time of the event. And really, you're telling the story of your program, of the thing that you're doing, and thank you that it was supported by a grant from the Community Foundation, or mentioning that it was supported by a grant from the Community Foundation. If we funded a physical improvement, some sort of capital project that, like James talked about, the before and after, if you're going to have a ribbon cutting or a dedication of some sort, that's a great time to put out the publicity about it. If you get unexpected coverage, like you send a press release this month and 4 months later you get some more coverage, great, that's fantastic. We would love for you to talk about it. And then reporting results. Also, results are the really important thing, the impact of your program that it's having on the individual clients that you're serving, but the community at large as well. So use your judgment with your publicity timing. When using a traditional press release, we provide a media contact list just as a courtesy. You are not required to use that list. I will also say, disclaimer, that we do our very best to make sure that all the contacts on that are up to date, but particularly with TV journalists, they tend to cycle through a station really fast. So if you use that list and you get a bounce back because someone's not there anymore, I apologize, but so that's okay, doesn't matter, you tried. You received a physical copy of that list with your grant award letter. It is also always available on our website. If you have your own media contact list, great, use that. If you have a very geographic specific program, for instance, if you're doing something in Belvedere and probably the Freeport Journal is not going to pick up that story, it's okay, you don't have to send it to the Freeport Journal too. Within the press release, refer to the Community Grants program and the fund specified in your award letter. It's explicitly stated which of the funds from the Community Foundation made the money possible for your grant. So we ask that you recognize that to help us remember those donors. Please use the provided CFNIL boilerplate language, that about CFNIL that goes at the bottom of the press release. And I have 2 asterisks by that bullet because I'll share a little bit more about that in a moment. Sometimes I find it helpful if I'm having trouble being creative with a press release to find the S, a story, a statistic, or a soundbite. Don't feel that you have to always have a quote from your executive director and a quote from your board chair. Find a quote from a program participant. That is just as valid and sometimes more compelling. So feel free to do that. And if you want any help with composition or editing, you just want somebody to look it over and none of your staff are interested in helping you edit a press release, contact me. I have a weird fascination with doing that. I'm happy to help. You are not required to get it approved or run it by me before you publicize it. But if you want any help at all, or just a suggestion, with someone else to look at it, you are welcome to send it to me. Do please copy me when you finally do distribute it to the media. So those double asterisks there, which we're talking about the CFNIL boilerplate language. If you have an old copy of our media list or the communication guidelines, please throw it away and use the new one that you received, because our boilerplate language has changed, not only to reflect like the amount of granting that increases every year, but also because we have a new vision statement and a new mission statement. We are celebrating our 70th anniversary this year. I'm so happy to have this many people on the call, but you really missed out coming to an in-person meeting because we gave all sorts of swag. So if you want some swag, stop by the office. We'll hook you up with all sorts of good stuff. But we're celebrating 70 years of growing connections, and we're just asking that you please use our new boilerplate language. If you need to be reminded what that is and just want me to drop it in an email for you, let me know. You each have established audiences and channels that make sense for your organization. And sometimes that's even better than just broadcasting to the whole community. Like we often hear, I was looking at some board minutes from the 90s. We're like looking through the history of the foundation. And back in the 90s, a huge concern of our board was nobody knows about us. We're the best kept secret, like no general awareness. I'm sure you hear that from your board members and your volunteers too, right? And it's not just an excuse because I'm not doing my job, but it's really true that you want the people who need to know about you to know about you. And sometimes that's the whole community and sometimes it's not. So you have a channel that works really well for your constituents. And that's a great way to publicize your grant, whether that's a digital or print newsletter, your annual report, donor communication, or particularly if your project has something tangible that a logo could go on or our name, whatever, you can use that. Like with a capital project, there's a plaque going on a room or a t-shirt for an event, like those are great ways to publicize. You are not required to put up a billboard in Times Square. Billboards are fun and they're actually cheaper than you might think. We bought our first billboard last year and it was surprisingly cheaper than we expected, but no expectation that that's happening. We are on all of these social media platforms. Please tag us if you make a post about your grant or about us in general, or you just want us to know about something, tag us. If you make a Facebook event, please add us as a co-host if you wish. When you do that and we accept it, it appears to all of our followers too. So you can just help get the word out. And we always suggest that you use photos and that you size them appropriately so they look the best that they can on the channel that they're on. And I'll give a little more, we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. If you need help, you're like, I don't have the skill, the time, the interest in making an image for social media, just reach out to me. I'm really am happy to help. Our friends at Family Counseling Services reached out this year and just said, hey, I just want like our logos to be in an image and have it fit Facebook appropriately. And I said, okay, cool, well, let's do that. So we went back and forth a couple times, and this is, a very basic template, but that's fine. It's absolutely fine. If you want something like this, reach out. I'm happy to provide this or some variation of that, whatever you need. Okay, a word about pictures. So we keep talking about pictures being so important. If you really need something like a lighthearted moment, visit awkwardfamilyphotos.com. That's where that picture on the left came from, which not only is like, very a time capsule of a picture of that family, but you see the gentleman in the background that, oops, we didn't frame this photo perfectly. But that was from back in the day, right? When we had point and click and you had to print the photo to know how it was going to turn out. The one on the right is actually, I'm actually in that photo. That's my family when I was a junior in college, and some random person took this very fuzzy picture of our family. And that's what you have to deal with. That's what you dealt with. And whatever year that was, I'm not going to say, because then you'll know how old I am. But we don't have to do that anymore. And you or your colleagues or someone who's a volunteer or even a program participant, we're all walking around with fantastic cameras in our pockets. Smartphones are just as good, if not sometimes better, than spending a lot of money on a fancy camera. If you have that, awesome. If you have someone on your staff who's a photographer or a volunteer, great. Don't stop doing that. But for those of you who don't have those resources, truly, you can take great photos with a smartphone. And so when you submit photos to us or use them, you really want it to like tell the best story that it can. So a photo like this, which I'm not going to identify this organization, but I was like, were they running through the aisle when they took this picture, right? You see it's crooked and it's fuzzy, and also it just makes the commodity there seem really not compelling. Like, what am I learning from this? Even pictures of food on shelves can be compelling. I'll show you another example. So here's some wonderful volunteers, but the file size was so tiny when I blew it up to like a usable size, you can't even really see their faces. So again, a smartphone is a way that you can take a really high quality photo with enough resolution that it will work and really show your program the way you want it to be shown. Here's some from the Northern Illinois Food Bank. And obviously that's an organization that has a lot of resources, but here they're taking pictures of literally gallons of milk. And these pictures could have been taken with a smartphone. I don't know if they were or not, but it makes milk look really compelling, right? So I just really encourage you to think about the pictures that you're taking. You want to tell the best story that you can and capture the memories of your good programs. So that's just a word about pictures. And there's a reason that it's not a competition to get in our community grants report. It really isn't, but there's a reason that the National Land Institute appeared on the cover of our community grants report this year, because they sent me a picture like this, and why Shelter Care has this beautiful family in our community grants report too, because these photos are just like, they're beautiful and they're compelling. If you are able to take pictures like this, do. Another slide in here, and I don't know where it went with that was well anyway. Logo usage guidelines. We have a logo that we love, and we would like it to look the way that it was intended to look. So please use the ones that we provide. If you need another version, either a high resolution, a vector, different color, whatever, reach out to me. Please do not stretch or alter our logo, and we will do the same for yours. Oh, here is the slide that I was thinking about. We are always available for press conferences, photo ops, and more. Here is my colleague Sarah with a shovel breaking ground for a habitat house last year. And we also, of course, you might see Kevin Haas's beautiful man bun in pictures. He's always out and about. Those of you who know what I'm talking about know what I'm talking about anyway. But we're always available to come to these things. We would love to be a part of these things. And actually, we've heard from a few media folks that they really like this type of photo a lot better than the big check photos, which don't really say anything other than there's some money changing hands. We are happy to do those. We've got a big check for a reason. We like to do them. But if there's another more compelling way to tell a story about your program, let's do it. And if you want to brainstorm with me, let's talk about it. Let's figure that out. I always like to provide a few resources that might help you with your grant publicity, but hopefully maybe will just help you in general with your communication. Every year I talk about Canva, and I will keep talking about it until I know all of you are using it. It is a free online word processing and graphic editing tool. We used to have a Creative Suite, Adobe Creative Suite license, and I used some, not all of those programs, sort of okay. I don't have that license anymore. I just use Canva. And for nonprofits, you can get the professional level for free. And it's fantastic. Your whole team can be added in there, all your brand elements. It's really, really wonderful. And it allows you to resize those pictures or graphics or whatever for Facebook, Twitter, anything really. You just say resize it for Facebook and it does it. And that's just wonderful. I love it. If you're an Instagram user, you know that you can put a hyperlink in the text content of a post, but it's not linkable, right? You can't click it in the content of a post. But so there's just one link in your bio, and we use Linktree for our Instagram link in bio if you know, again, if you use Instagram, you know what I'm talking about, but we find that really useful. If you need any manipulation of PDF files, going from PDF to another format or back and forth, or cropping, editing, compressing, anything like that, this is a free online. PDF to go is free online. I use it all the time to shrink things or change file formats. And then for those of you who get a little techie wonky and you're trying to figure out why the URL you're sharing to Facebook is pulling the wrong image, or the image that it's pulling from that web page just looks crazy, this sharing debugger can help you with that. It takes a little more like knowledge of developer stuff, but if you play around it enough, you'll figure it out. One more area of resources. Not every organization is to a point where they're considering types of inclusive language that they're using, but if your organization is there, or even just like thinking about it, we wanted to provide some resources for having more inclusive language in your communication in general. So if you're thinking about like adding pronouns to your email signature or business cards or whatever, or just in general, and you're wondering how to do that, or you have staff who are questioning, or board members or whatever, pronouns.org is a really good place with very straightforward language about how, what, why, how of doing that. Also, if you are ever writing content or speaking about the trans community, the Trans Journalists Association Style Guide is a great place to go to find the appropriate language to use and how to use that respectfully. And then there's a few sources here for like stock photography and graphics that aren't the typical. I always look at stock photography, you think about like these beautiful young white people typically, and it doesn't have to be that way. If you use stock photography for anything, here's a few other sources to have a little more diversity and inclusion in the images that you are using. But overall, don't panic. We're all in this together. We very much recognize, this came up in our session yesterday, that with a group that they were first-time grantees and they were all volunteers, and like a group of retired men that are all volunteers, and they're like, I feel completely overwhelmed. I don't know what I'm doing. Do not panic if you're in that situation. If you're in this, we usually use the example of the College of Medicine as like, oh, well, they've got all the resources, everything like that. That's not necessarily true, because we recognize that each of those programs, you might be responsible for your own communication and not have the support of a marketing team, or you're dependent on them to tell your story. You don't get to control anything. So we recognize that you all have unique circumstances. And really, really, all we're saying is talk about your program and let people know that you had the awesome success of getting a grant. Okay, before we jump into a few announcements, we will wrap up by 1 o'clock, unless there are thousands and thousands of questions. But if you have any questions, now is the time to ask. So feel free to drop them in the chat, raise your hand, come off mute, whatever you like. All right. Well, that's easy. We will share the slides to everyone who registered for a session.
We did get a chat. Len
Oh.
Lindemann said, it just asked when the PowerPoint would be available.
Yeah, so I mean, it's available now. We've got the slides. We will we'll email it out to everyone who registered, and we'll also put it up on the our current grantees page of the website.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Okay. You feel free to hang out if you have more questions, or if you want to ask one of us like directly and specifically something, but I'm going to go blast through some announcements. The first one is the most important. So this is one you really want to pay attention to. The community grant cycle this year is shifting earlier in the year. There's a variety of reasons why that is. Most of them are completely like internal operational reasons for us. But anyway, just so you know, it's coming early, and we haven't done a public blast about this information. So you grantees coming to these sessions this week are the first to know. It will open June 20th, close August 15th, 815 day. And then the awards will be announced the week of Thanksgiving. And you should receive your checks we're anticipating you will receive your checks before December, by the end of November. So everything is just shifting a little earlier this year. This summer, nonprofit happy hour will return. Last summer, we hosted 3 happy hours, one June, July, and August. We are killing ourselves with events this year, so we're only doing one, but also because we would love to have all of you together in one session. So please put Thursday, July 20th on your calendars. Come here to the house from 4 to 7 p.m. There is, I can't promise, but there's a not insignificant chance the VDubs cocktail bar will be here for that. Regardless, there will be delicious eats and drinks and hanging out and just enjoying each other's company, truly just enjoying each other's company. No work, all play was our tagline last year. So please come to that. And then on February 25th, we are co-hosting the first time this event has ever happened, the first time we've ever participated in something like this, but an event called Black Winter, and it is a formal event celebrating Black excellence in scholarship and fundraising for existing scholarships for Black students in our community. We are working with several other partners on this event. Some of the scholarships that we're fundraising for are here at the Community Foundation, and we have pledged a match. We will be matching $50,000 to give to those scholarships, and there will be other scholarships that we're raising money for as well. So Black Tie suggested, fabulous expected. We hope you will consider coming out to this event. It's going to be really, really fun. And then in April, we are again hosting Art Scene here at the foundation. We partner with the ARC. They bring art made by their project art program participants, put it up throughout the house. And this year we're sort of dual purposing the event. April is also National Volunteer Month, so all of our volunteers will be invited to come to that, but the whole public is also invited to come and enjoy Art Scene here at the Community Foundation. Here is all of our contact information. There's someone else on the staff that you really want to reach. There are other people who work here, but it's on our website. But probably any of us will answer the questions that you have. And just thank you so much for attending today. If you have a question, feel free to hang out. But just know you guac our world, and we are so proud to work with each and every one of you and look forward to seeing the good things that this year holds.